Hey, everybody, welcome back. We're going to be taking a deep dive today into the Navigating Change webinar,
Yeah.
turning it into something that you can actually use. We've got those
Hmm.
speaker notes and handouts.
Oh, yeah. This stuff is good.
If you're feeling stuck in your substance misuse prevention work, this is going to give you like a jolt of energy.
No, totally. And what's really cool about this stuff is that it doesn't just talk about theories of change. It actually gives you ways to put it into action.
Mm.
We're going to connect the Beckert and Harris change formula to tools like the TRIZ Liberating Structure
Okay.
and even things like that. Two truths and a dream activity.
Okay. So you're working on your program and maybe you're hitting a wall
Yeah.
and you need to shift the community's attitude or get your coalition fired up about what you're working on.
Mm-hmm.
Change is just tough.
It is.
And the webinar even mentioned that 70% of change initiatives fail.
Yeah. That's a lot.
Yeah. So we need some way to beat those odds.
Yeah.
And that's where this formula comes in.
Yeah. It's like a cheat sheet to make change actually happen.
So this formula, it's from way back in the 70s,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still super relevant.
Yeah.
And it basically boils down to four things.
Yeah.
You need dissatisfaction with how things are right now. You need a vision of what could be. You need some first steps to get there. And then you need a way to deal with any resistance.
Right. And think about it like this. Let's say you're trying to start this awesome community-wide prevention program.
Right.
If nobody even knows there's a problem, you're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
So you have to create that dissatisfaction.
Right.
And you can use data to help you with this. You can show people the numbers about substance misuse in your area.
Right.
Or even share some personal stories that make it real for folks.
Right.
And that's where I think that two truths and a dream activity from the handout comes in.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
It gets people thinking about that vision part of the formula. It's more than just an icebreaker.
Right.
Sharing your dreams helps people actually see what a better future could look like.
Uh-huh.
And that can really get people motivated.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's like saying, hey, things are kind of messed up right now, but let's imagine what it could be like
Right.
if things were better.
Yeah.
And then that dream that everyone shares becomes the fuel,
Yeah.
to make it happen.
Absolutely.
And speaking of everyone working together, there's this story in the Community Readiness for Community Change handbook that I think really fits in here. It's the starfish story.
Oh, yeah. The one where the guy is throwing starfish back into the ocean.
Yeah.
And someone's like, dude, there are thousands of these. It doesn't matter.
Right. Right. It's pointless.
Yeah. He's like, well, it matters to this one.
This one matters.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that even though the problem might seem huge,
Right.
the things that we do matter.
Every little thing adds up.
Every little thing adds up, like helping one family or getting one person to change their mind about substance use
Totally.
makes a difference in the big picture.
Oh, yeah.
And this leads perfectly into the Colorado tri-ethnic community change model, because this model gives us 9 stages that a community might go through when dealing with something like substance misuse.
Right. So it starts with no awareness at all.
Yeah.
People don't even think it's an issue. And then it moves through stages like denial and resistance, vague awareness. And then eventually people are actually ready to do something about it.
Right. And this is so useful for our listeners who are out there working in these communities every day.
Totally.
Imagine trying to start a prevention program, but you're getting all this pushback.
Right.
If you understand where they're at in those stages, it can totally change how you approach the problem.
Yeah, for sure. If they're stuck in denial, you got to focus on raising awareness before you even try to get a program off the ground.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
And even within the same community, you might have different groups or even different people who are at different stages.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So the trick is to meet people where they are and use strategies that work for their level of understanding and motivation.
I like that, meet people where they are. That's good.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about the theory, but how do we make this stuff actually work?
Yeah.
That's where this next tool comes in. The TRIZ Liberating Structure.
Oh, yeah.
It might sound a little intimidating, but I promise it's actually pretty fun and a really good way to get change moving.
Yeah. Okay. I'm intrigued.
So what I love about TRIZ is it kind of turns problem solving on its head.
Okay.
Instead of trying to come up with amazing solutions right away, you start by thinking about the worst case scenario.
Wait, what? The worst case? That doesn't sound very motivating.
I know, right? It sounds kind of crazy. But stick with me. By thinking about all the ways you could totally sabotage your own efforts,
Okay.
you actually bring all those hidden fears and obstacles to the surface.
Oh.
It's like shining a light on all those bad habits we have that we don't even realize we're doing. And once you see them, you can start to get rid of them and clear a path forward.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this could work. So how would this look in real life? Like, let's say you're working with a coalition and you're trying to come up with a plan to reduce underage drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Would you actually ask them to come up with the worst possible ideas?
Totally. And it's so funny because people actually love this part.
They do.
Yeah. It's a chance to let loose, be a little silly, and get all those bad ideas out in the open.
Okay.
So someone might say something like, we could just ignore all the research and do what we've always done.
Oh,
Or we could have our meetings at a bar and make sure there are tons of distractions. But by saying these things out loud, you can start to break them down and figure out what's really holding you back.
Okay.
Like maybe it's that people aren't communicating well enough. Or maybe it's that they're scared to try something new.
That fear of trying new things, I think that gets a lot of us.
Yeah, it's easy to stick with what you know, even if it's not working.
Right.
And that's where the power of TRZ really comes in. By admitting those fears and bad habits, we can choose to do the opposite. Mm-hmm.
So instead of ignoring the research, we decide to use strategies that are actually proven to work.
Yeah.
And instead of avoiding tough conversations, speak their mind and challenge each other.
So it's like reverse psychology for change.
Exactly. You figure out the worst possible things you could do, and then you figure out how to do the exact opposite.
I love it. And the coolest part is that the TRIZ Liberating Structure is actually super organized.
Oh, yeah?
The webinar handout has like step-by-step instructions and even tips for how to do it online.
It's all laid out for you?
Yeah, you can literally take this handout and use it to run a brainstorming session with your team.
That's what I love about it. It takes all the guesswork out of it.
Totally.
And it even has tips for keeping people engaged online, which is so important nowadays.
Yeah, for sure. With so much of our work happening virtually.
Yeah.
You know what I find super helpful are those specific examples they give.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's say you're trying to get your coalition to communicate better.
The handout suggests that you brainstorm, like, the absolute worst ways to communicate. Like, sending those super vague emails.
Right.
Or always interrupting each other during meetings.
Oh, yeah. I can see how that would lead to some interesting discussion.
Right. It's like you're giving people permission to be brutally honest
Totally.
about what's not working.
Yeah. And then you flip it around and ask, okay, so if those are the worst ways, what are the best ways?
Right.
And all of a sudden, you're coming up with solutions instead of just focusing on the problems.
It's like that saying, the obstacle is the way.
I like that.
Right.
By finding the roadblocks, you're actually figuring out how to get around them.
Exactly. And it's not just about coming up with ideas. It's about getting everyone on the same page.
Right.
And feeling like they're all part of the solution.
Totally. When everyone has a voice and they feel like they're being heard, they're way more likely to support the changes.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Which brings us to another important thing that the webinar talked about, psychological safety.
Okay.
I know it's kind of a buzzword these days.
It is.
But I think it's so important when we're talking about change, especially in substance misuse prevention.
Absolutely. Creating a culture of psychological safety means that people feel comfortable speaking up, sharing their ideas, and even admitting when they're struggling.
Right.
If people are too scared to try new things or challenge the way things are, we're going to miss out on so many opportunities to grow and be creative.
And, you know, it all ties back to that change formula.
Oh, yeah. How so?
If people are scared to say they're unhappy with the situation,
Right.
or they're too afraid to share their big dreams for the future,
Right.
then we're missing two of the most important parts of making change happen.
Yeah, totally. Psychological safety is like the foundation for everything else.
Exactly. And the good news is that there are things we can do to build it up.
Okay. Like what?
The webinar mentioned some really good strategies, like actually listening to people's concerns, making sure they know that their feelings are valid,
Right.
and creating a space where it's okay to make mistakes.
That's huge.
And that 2 Truths and a Dream activity is a great example.
Yeah. How so?
It helps people be vulnerable and connect on a personal level, which can make it easier to have open and honest conversations.
I like that. And, you know, even the TRIZ activity, with its focus on thinking about the worst case scenario, can actually help build psychological safety in a weird way.
How?
It's like saying, hey, it's okay to have bad ideas. It's okay to mess up. We're all in this together.
Right.
It normalizes the idea that we don't have to be perfect all the time, which can be a huge relief, especially in a field like substance misuse prevention where things can feel really intense.
Absolutely. Because we're dealing with some really heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And there's no magic bullet.
No.
We need to be able to try new things, learn from our mistakes, and change our approach as we go.
For sure.
And that can only happen if people feel safe enough to take those risks.
Totally. So we've talked about the change formula, community readiness, the power of TRIZ, and the need for psychological safety.
Yeah.
But let's get even more practical here. I know our listeners are probably thinking, okay, this is all great, but how do I actually use these tools in my work?
Right, like on a Monday morning.
Exactly.
I'm glad you brought that up because the webinar gave some really helpful real-world examples.
Okay.
So let's say you're working with a coalition that's been trying to address underage drinking in their community.
Okay.
They've been meeting for months,
Yeah.
but they can't seem to agree on a plan. And people are starting to get discouraged.
That's something a lot of our listeners can probably relate to.
For sure. Coalitions can be amazing.
They can.
But it's easy to get bogged down in all the details.
Yeah. And everyone has their own priorities.
Exactly. So how can we use these tools to help them get back on track?
Good question.
Well, first we got to figure out how dissatisfied they are.
Okay.
Do they really care about underage drinking? Do they see it as a top priority?
Right.
Or are they just going through the motions?
That's a good point.
And that's where those honest conversations come in. Maybe you could have a discussion where people share their own experiences with underage drinking.
Yes.
Or talk about how it's affected their families or their communities.
Right. Or you could even share some local data that shows how big of a problem it really is.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
The key is to make it real for people. Remind them why this work matters.
And once you've got that sense of urgency back,
Yeah.
you can start talking about the vision.
Right.
What would it look like if underage drinking wasn't a problem anymore? What are they actually trying to achieve?
And that's where that two truths and a dream activity could be so powerful. Imagine everyone sharing their dreams for their community.
Oh, I love that idea.
Right. It can help them connect on a deeper level.
For sure.
And spark some really creative ideas.
Absolutely. And once they have a shared vision, they can start brainstorming those first steps.
Yes.
And this is where TRZ can really shine.
Okay, how so?
Imagine asking them, what are the absolute worst things you could do to make sure your efforts to reduce underage drinking fail miserably?
I can already picture people coming up with some crazy ideas.
Well, yeah. Like, let's hold all our meetings at the local bar.
Exactly. Or like, let's make all of our prevention materials super boring and confusing.
That's it. It's a way to get all those hidden fears and obstacles out in the open.
Right. And then you flip it and say, okay, if those are the worst things you could do, what are the best things?
Exactly. And suddenly you're brainstorming solutions from a whole new perspective.
It's like they say, sometimes you got to break things down to build them back up stronger.
Yeah, I like that.
And throughout this whole process, we got to remember to keep building that psychological safety.
Yeah. People need to feel comfortable sharing their ideas, even the crazy ones, without worrying about being judged.
Right. And that goes for anyone who's working in substance misuse prevention.
Whether you're part of a coalition working in a school or leading a community organization.
Exactly. We all need to feel supported and empowered to try new things.
And learn from our experiences.
Exactly. So we've talked about how to use these tools to get a coalition back on track.
Right.
But let's look at another example. Imagine you're working in a community where there's a lot of stigma around substance use disorder.
Okay.
People are afraid to talk about it.
Yeah.
And they don't want to get help or support their loved ones who are struggling.
That's a huge problem.
It is. It's a major barrier to both prevention and recovery.
Stigma isolates people and makes them feel ashamed.
Right.
And it stops them from getting the help they need.
Absolutely. And it often comes from a lack of understanding about substance use disorder.
Right. People don't always see it as a chronic disease.
They might think it's a moral failing or a lack of willpower.
Yeah.
Instead of a complex health condition that needs treatment and support.
Okay, so how do we use these tools to start breaking down that stigma?
Well, the community readiness model can be really helpful here. If the community is in that denial or resistance stage, we know we need to focus on education and awareness.
Right.
We might need to start by sharing personal stories of recovery.
Yeah.
Dispelling myths about addiction and highlighting the science behind it.
Those personal stories can be really powerful.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Hearing from people who have been there can really change people's minds.
Absolutely.
And help them see the human side of this issue.
It's about making it real, making people feel empathy.
Right.
And we can also use the TRIZ method here.
Oh, interesting. How?
Imagine asking people, what are the absolute worst things we could do to make sure that stigma around substance use disorder keeps getting worse in our community?
Okay.
It might feel uncomfortable to think about it that way, but it can be really eye-opening.
I can see that.
People might say things like, we could keep whispering about it and pretending it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Or we could judge and shame people who are struggling instead of offering support.
Right?
And then by flipping those negative behaviors, we can start brainstorming solutions.
Okay. I like that. So what kind of solutions could we come up with?
Well, we could launch a public awareness campaign that challenges those stereotypes about addiction. Or we could create safe spaces where people can share their stories and connect with others who understand what they're going through.
That's a good idea.
And again, creating that psychological safety is crucial.
Right.
We need to make sure people feel comfortable talking about substance use disorder without being judged or shamed.
Absolutely. It's about creating a culture of compassion and understanding.
Yes.
Where people feel supported in getting help for themselves or their loved ones.
And I think the TRIZ method can also help us with another common challenge, resistance to using evidence-based prevention programs.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that happen a lot.
Maybe school administrators are skeptical about whether a program will actually work.
Right.
Or community members are worried about how much it'll cost, or if there will be any negative side effects.
And that resistance often comes from not having enough information or not really understanding how these programs work.
Exactly. So we need to start by educating people about the research.
Okay.
And giving them examples of how these programs have been successful in other communities.
And we can also use the TRZ method to really explore those fears and concerns.
How did that work?
Imagine you're talking to a group of school administrators, and you ask them, what are the absolute worst things that could happen if we implement this evidence-based prevention program?
I see where you're going with this.
It might sound strange.
Yeah.
But by acknowledging those fears head on, we can start figuring out how to address them and come up with strategies to reduce any potential negative impacts.
So it's like saying, we hear your concerns and we're going to work together to find solutions.
Exactly. And that collaborative approach can really build trust and get people on board.
It's about turning those fears into opportunities for conversation and problem solving.
And I think that's a great message to leave our listeners with.
I agree.
Change can be tough. But by using these tools and approaches, we can create a much more supportive and effective environment for substance misuse prevention work.
Absolutely. And you know, all those handouts and resources from the webinar?
Oh, yeah. Those are gold.
They're full of practical tips and step-by-step guides for putting all of this into action.
Don't let them just sit in your inbox.
Right. Print them out. Share them with your colleagues.
Get them out there.
And start experimenting.
It's like having a cheat sheet for navigating change.
I love that.
And remember, change is a journey, not a destination.
So true.
There are going to be bumps along the way.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Absolutely.
The important thing is to keep learning, adapting, and working together.
And don't be afraid to ask for help.
That's right. There's a whole community of substance misuse prevention professionals out there.
Yes.
Who are dealing with the same challenges and celebrating the same wins.
We're all in this together.
That's it.
And by working together, sharing our knowledge, and supporting each other, we can create real lasting change in our communities.
So what's the one big takeaway from all of this?
I think it's that change is possible.
It is.
Even when it feels impossible.
Yeah.
By understanding how change works, using the right tools, and creating a culture of psychological safety.
We can make a real difference in the lives of individuals, families, and communities.
Absolutely. And remember that starfish story?
Oh, yeah.
Every action we take, no matter how small,
can create a ripple effect.
Yeah, exactly. So go out there, embrace the challenge, and start making those ripples.